They came to a grieving widow with an offer they thought she could not refuse. Her husband was dead. Her son was a child. Her enemies believed her powerless, so they demanded that she marry the man who had ordered her husband's death. Olga of Kiev welcomed them with a smile. Then she had them carried into a trench and buried alive. It was only the beginning. Before her revenge was over, another embassy would burn, thousands would die, and an entire city would become the target of one of history's darkest legends. In the middle of the 10th century, the lands around Kiev were not yet a single, stable nation. They were a loose and often violent network of towns, tribes, trade routes, and tribute obligations. The ruling dynasty of the Rus controlled this world through armed force, negotiated loyalty, and the regular collection of wealth. Prince Igor of Kiev inherited this dangerous system. Each year, the ruler and his warriors traveled through subject territories, collecting furs, wax, honey, silver, and other goods. The practice was known as polyudy. It enriched the prince, but it also placed him face to face with communities that resented both the payment and the men who demanded it. One of those communities was the Drevlians, a Slavic people living west of Kiev. According to the Primary Chronicle, Igor collected their tribute in about 945 and began the journey home. Then, encouraged by members of his retinue, he turned back. He wanted more. This second demand was a fatal mistake. The Drevlians saw not a lawful ruler, but a predator returning after he had already been paid. They seized Igor and killed him. A later Byzantine account describes an especially brutal execution in which his body was tied to bent trees and torn apart when the trunks were released. Whether that detail is exact or embellished, the political result is clear. The ruler of Kiev was dead, and his heir was too young to govern. That left Igor's widow, Olga. Almost everything about Olga's early life is uncertain. Later traditions placed her origins near Pskov and connected her to Varangian, Slavic, or Scandinavian backgrounds. What can be said with greater confidence is that she was Igor's wife, the mother of Sviatoslav, and suddenly the most important political figure in Kiev. The Drevlians believed Igor's death had created an opportunity. Their prince, Mal, could marry Olga, absorb Kiev's ruling house, and place the young Sviatoslav under Drevlian control. It was a practical plan by the standards of dynastic politics. It was also based on a catastrophic misunderstanding of the woman they expected to intimidate. The famous account of what followed comes mainly from the Primary Chronicle, compiled more than a century and a half after the events. Its revenge episodes are shaped like moral tales, filled with dramatic speeches, repeated patterns, and symbolic punishments. Historians therefore treat many details with caution. Olga's regency and conflict with the Drevlians are historical. The precise theatrical sequence of her vengeance may belong partly to legend. But legend or not, the story preserved Olga's reputation with extraordinary force. The Drevlians sent envoys to Kiev. They told Olga that Igor had been killed because he behaved like a wolf among sheep. Their own prince, Mal, was a better man, they claimed. Olga should marry him. Olga listened and answered calmly. She appeared to accept the proposal. To honor the envoys, she said, the people of Kiev would carry them in their boat the following day. The messengers returned to their vessel, believing they had won. During the night, however, Olga ordered a deep trench dug inside the court. The next morning, the envoys dressed proudly and sat in their boat. Kiev's men lifted the entire vessel onto their shoulders and carried it toward Olga's hall. The Drevlians mistook the procession for a triumph. Then the boat was dropped into the trench. As earth was thrown over them, Olga looked down and asked whether they found the honor to their taste. The men who had arrived to arrange her surrender were buried alive beneath the city they expected to control. Olga did not immediately reveal what had happened. Instead, she sent word to Prince Mal. If he truly wanted her as a bride, she said, he must send a delegation of his most distinguished men. Only then could she travel to Drevlian territory with the dignity expected of a princess. Mal agreed. A second embassy arrived in Kiev, composed of prominent Drevlians who expected negotiations, ceremony, and marriage. Olga invited them to wash after their journey. A bathhouse was prepared, and the visitors entered. Once they were inside, the doors were barred from the outside. The building was set on fire. The second delegation died in the flames. Two groups of leaders had now vanished, each destroyed by the hospitality they believed proved Olga's submission. Still, her revenge was not finished. Olga sent another message to the Drevlians. Before any marriage could take place, she wished to hold a funeral feast at the site of Igor's death. They should prepare large quantities of mead so that she could mourn her husband according to custom. The Drevlians complied. Olga traveled into their land with a chosen force and approached Igor's burial place. A great feast began. Her hosts drank deeply, reassured by her apparent willingness to end the conflict. According to the Chronicle, Olga waited until the Drevlians were intoxicated. Then she ordered her warriors to attack. The text claims that 5,000 men were killed. That number may be literary exaggeration, but the purpose of the episode is unmistakable. Olga was not merely punishing individuals. She was breaking the leadership and fighting strength of the people who had killed her husband. The widow whom they had treated as a political prize had become the commander of a campaign. The following year, Olga led an army against the Drevlians. Towns fell, tribute was imposed, and the resistance narrowed around Iskorostan, the city associated with Igor's death. Its defenders understood what surrender might mean. They held out through a long siege. Olga then offered terms that appeared astonishingly mild. She told the inhabitants that the other Drevlian towns had submitted and returned to their fields. She no longer demanded silver or precious goods. Instead, every household should give her 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. The request seemed harmless. Birds were common, and the price of peace was almost nothing. The people of Iskorostan gathered the animals and sent them to Olga. That night, the story says, Olga's soldiers attached small bundles of smoldering material to the birds. When released, the pigeons flew back to their dovecots, while the sparrows returned beneath the roofs and eaves where they nested. Fires began across the city at once. The defenders could not extinguish so many separate flames. They fled the walls, and Olga's forces seized them. Some were killed, some enslaved, and the survivors were forced to pay tribute. The image is unforgettable, an entire city defeated by the instinct of birds returning home. It is also one of the most disputed parts of the story. Similar fire-bearing bird tales appear in other ancient and medieval traditions, and the method would have been difficult to control. The Chronicle may have preserved folklore rather than a literal military operation. Yet the tale expresses a political truth. Olga completed the subjugation of the Drevlians, and Iskorostan paid for its connection to Igor's death. If Olga's story ended with burning cities, she would be remembered only as a terrifying avenger. What followed is more important to the history of the Rus. Igor had died because tribute collection depended on the ruler's armed retinue traveling through subject lands and deciding what to demand. The system encouraged abuse, uncertainty, and rebellion. Olga responded by changing it. She established fixed tribute arrangements and administrative centers often described as pogosts. The Chronicle also associates her with defined payments, regulations, and collection sites. Instead of allowing the prince to wander back for an extra payment, the state would know where, when, and how much was owed. These reforms strengthened Kiev's authority and made revenue more predictable. They also show Olga learning directly from the failure that killed her husband. Revenge destroyed the immediate enemy. administration reduced the chance that the same crisis would happen again. For years, Olga ruled as regent for Sviatoslav. She traveled through the territories of the Rus, settled disputes, organized obligations, and preserved the dynasty until her son could govern. The woman the Drevlians expected to absorb through marriage instead consolidated the political system they had challenged. Olga's later life created an even stranger contrast. At some point, she accepted Christianity. The traditional narrative places her baptism in Constantinople and says she took the Christian name Helena. The exact date and circumstances remain debated, but a visit to the Byzantine capital in 957 is recorded in imperial sources. The chronicle surrounds her conversion with another story of cleverness. The Byzantine emperor supposedly wished to marry her. Olga asked him to serve as her baptismal sponsor. Once baptized, she argued that a godfather could not marry his spiritual daughter. Whether invented or not, the tale matches the same image found in the revenge episodes. Rulers underestimate Olga, and she defeats them through control of ritual and language. She tried to persuade Sviatoslav to accept Christianity, but he refused. His warriors, he feared, would mock him. Olga did not force the issue. She remained Christian while her son continued to follow the old beliefs and pursue military campaigns. Olga died in 969. Later generations honored her as one of the earliest major Christian rulers of the Rus. The Orthodox Church eventually recognized her as a saint and equal to the apostles for her role in preparing the ground for the conversion later carried out under her grandson, Vladimir. That religious memory did not erase the violent stories. Instead, saint and avenger became inseparable parts of the same legend. Modern readers naturally ask how a woman credited with mass killing and the destruction of a city could later be venerated as a saint. The answer lies partly in the values of medieval historical writing. The Chronicle was not a modern biography. It presented rulers through moral patterns, speeches, and symbolic justice. Olga's pagan revenge demonstrated intelligence, authority, and terrifying determination. Her conversion then redirected those qualities toward the Christian future imagined by the chronicler. Her victims were also portrayed as oath-breakers and rebels who murdered their lawful prince. In that framework, Olga's vengeance restored dynastic order. The scale of the punishment made the restoration more dramatic, not less legitimate. None of this requires every detail to be accepted literally. The buried boat, the burning bathhouse, the drunken massacre, and the fire-carrying birds form a sequence so perfectly structured that it invites suspicion. Each embassy enters a trap. Each apparent concession becomes a weapon. Each act raises the price of the Drevlians' original decision. But behind the literary design stands Olga. She survived a succession crisis, protected an heir, defeated opposition, reorganized tribute, maintained Kiev's power, and conducted diplomacy with one of the most sophisticated empires of her age. The Drevlians believed that killing Igor had left Kiev vulnerable. They saw a widow, a young boy, and a throne ready to be taken. What they failed to see was that Olga understood power more clearly than the husband they had killed. The revenge stories made her immortal because they turn weakness into a trap. Grief becomes patience, hospitality becomes execution, tribute becomes fire, yet her lasting achievement was not the number of enemies she destroyed. It was the state she kept alive. Olga of Kiev stands at the boundary between history and legend, pagan violence and Christian sainthood, personal vengeance and political reform. The darker details may never be proven, but the result is beyond dispute. The widow her enemies expected to control became one of the most formidable rulers of medieval Eastern Europe.